Much of Uganda has returned back to normal after a tense election marked by violence in some parts of the country and a disputed poll results. President Yoweri Museveni has accused the main opposition party, led by Bobi Wine, of trying to destabilize the country and cause chaos.
I asked the confused people to come back to sanity, because what they are planning, what they wanted to do, we already know, and we have already demobilized.
Wine, also known as Robert Chagulanyi, is in hiding after security forces raided his home last Friday. How are you? How's your family?
I'm alive. I don't know how my family is.
He spoke to Al Jazeera.
I would love to be in my home. I've not changed my clothes in days. I want to be home. I want to be free. I want to take care of my people. But the military and police have taken over my home. This is a crackdown to intimidate, to silence, and to completely, subdue the forces of change.
You have rejected the elections. You said that the election is rigged. What evidence do you have?
This time, not the police, not the military, but Electoral Commission officials took part in pre-ticking ballot papers in favor of General Museveni. Glad enough, we have record of them, we have videos of them doing that.
Do you want people to come out to the streets to protest?
We want the people of Uganda to take charge of this and find numerous creative ways. Could be protesting on the streets. Some of us started protesting by holding high the national flag. Others can protest by staying at home.
Protests, largely over the election result, turned violent in different parts of the country. Most of the violence happened in areas like this. Several people were killed in some areas, allegedly by security forces. Police said they were containing a riot situation. Namutebi Oliver is grieving her son. He was shot by a stray bullet during running battles.
He died for no reason. It's unbelievable.
It's still unclear how many people died in this election, but what's clear is that many Ugandans remain fearful for their future. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera, Mukono Districts.
Don't miss out and get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.
As President Yoweri Museveni prepares for his 7th term in office, will Uganda's opposition be silenced? Candidate Bobi Wine remains in hiding, but still protesting an election his supporters say was stolen. So will Uganda return to business as usual, or will the opposition rise again? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Uganda. "81-year-old Yoweri Museveni insists Ugandans voted freely to keep him in power after almost 40 years. The man who once said the problem with Africa is leaders who won't leave now feels he needs a 7th term to protect the gains he's made. Meanwhile, his opponent, Bobi Wine, is assumed to be in hiding for his own protection. Many election observers agree Wine was not afforded a fair playing field in the lead-up to the vote, and an internet shutdown during and after ballots were cast helped bolster opposition claims of a rigged election. But with Museveni's own son in charge of the military and Uganda's political infrastructure, working with one president since 1986.
Will opposition figures ever stand a chance? Here's a look.
5 more years in power for Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni after last week's tense election. He received over 71% of the vote, while his main challenger, singer-turned-politician Bobi Wine, received just 25%. The voting was held under an internet blackout. Authorities said it was meant to prevent fraud, but the opposition says it was designed to help Museveni stay in power. Wine has accused the government of arresting hundreds of his supporters and cracking down on his rallies. Election observers from the African Union say they found no evidence of ballot stuffing, but denounced reports of intimidation, arrests and abduction. At least 7 people were killed in clashes between opposition supporters and police. Security forces also surrounded Bobi Wine's house. He said he and his wife had been placed under house arrest while officers raided his apartment. In a video posted on social media on Saturday, Wine said he managed to escape and urged his supporters to protest peacefully against what he called the fraudulent results.
I know they're looking for me, but even if they succeed and get me and do whatever, I want to say this to you, fellow Ugandans. First and foremost, we reject whatever is being declared by Mr. Byabakama, because those so-called results that they're declaring are fake and they don't in any way reflect what happened at the polling stations.
Meanwhile, in his first speech after victory, 81-year-old Museveni called Wine and others traitors who were trying to incite violence.
I asked the confused people to come back to sanity, because what they are planning, what they wanted to do, we already know, and we have already mobilized together with the people. Much of it, the residual should stop, because we know we shall get all of them if they don't stop.
Museveni campaigned for his 7th term in office under the slogan of protecting the gains. He seized power in 1986 following a years-long rebellion against the military regime at the time. That marked an end to the bloody civil war, and subsequently Museveni brought relative prosperity to the East African country. Today, many of his supporters still credit him for those accomplishments.
Since I was born, I've never seen wars in Uganda, and he has brought peace in Uganda. He has built houses, for all people have become rich.
Yet for many others, he has become an increasingly autocratic ruler. In 2005, Museveni removed term limits for the presidency, and then in 2017, he scrapped the age limit, allowing him to run indefinitely. He consolidated state power, while his political challengers have been arrested and suppressed. And human rights groups warn of a clampdown on free speech and dissent.
We are tired of the 40-year-old regime, 40 years of bad governance, 40 years of being led by politicians from the one side.
But Africa's 3rd oldest president shows no sign of stepping aside in one of the world's youngest countries.
Now, we had scheduled an interview with opposition candidate Bobi Wine. However, his whereabouts are still unknown at this hour after he says he managed to escape house arrest and has gone into hiding. So, joining me now to talk further about a 7th term for Yoweri Museveni are, from Kampala, journalist and deputy director at the African Institute for Investigative Journalism, Raymond Mujuni. From Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, visiting fellow in the Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations, Sarah Logan. And also from the Ugandan capital, executive director at the Uganda Media Center, Obed Katuribe. Thank you all so much for being with me. Raymond, I'll start with you to ask what you make of the general media narrative outside Uganda that really says this just wasn't a fair election.
It's very difficult to place in the sense that an election is a large bureaucratic procedure. Uganda was trying to get more than 21 million people to vote at 50,000 separate polling stations. Of course, there was campaigning, there was competition, electoral competition. But on the by large and whole, in the history of Uganda's elections, you can't say that the election itself was a successful endeavor. On the morning of the election, of course, the biometric voter verification kits, which was supposed to identify the voters, failed, and the Electoral Commission moved to the manual register. That has been, I think, the major talking point. But after that, much of the voting itself went on peacefully. We did hear incidents, about 3 or 4 incidents during the polling process itself. And then after the tallying is when I think some of the other incidents came up. But the day of voting itself was a largely peaceful day. And I think Uganda was holding its 7th election under the current constitution and of other elections. It's going to take some time for us to know all the information because we were under an internet shutdown. But from what we can gather now, the incidents are few and far in between. Majority of the polling stations, and that is 50,000 separate polling stations, majority of those polling stations had fair voting.
But so overall, you feel the election properly reflects the will of the Ugandan people?
So it's difficult to know the will of the Ugandan people except through a statistical endeavor like an election. What for a fact is that in many urban areas where you find a lot of people that would have internet access, the ruling party has not been as popular as it previously was. So there is a feeling that in most of the urban areas that the election is not fair, but in the rural areas and if you just step out of the towns, the ruling party still enjoys massive support in those areas. Many of them were unconvinced about the message heading into the election. Or even then, much of the election happened around civil and political rights, something that really wasn't appealing to rural voters. So it's still very difficult for us to tell what the will of the Ugandan people is. But I think that we can start with looking at the election and the election results. And also we can start by looking forward to the election commission, and then maybe the teams that had a lot more ground on more people on the ground will tell us what was happening in the areas where they were polling from.
Okay. Sarah, does that sound like a fair enough analysis? And what to you does that internet shutdown alone say about this election? What was maybe lost?
No, I very much agree with Raymond. I think it's always the anomalies that get highlighted quite a lot in the international media, even in the regional media, just because it's out of the ordinary. We don't always see good coverage of polling stations where everything went according to plan. I think the internet shutdown is, however, a big concern. It at least creates the perception that there was something to hide. And even if there wasn't, it creates the perception, which is a problem. It brings in mistrust into the process. And it also brings a degree of fear where people don't know what's happening. They don't know if anything is going wrong with family members, if they can't reach family members. And it instills a degree of fear that is, it's part of intimidation, which is quite concerning.
Much of Uganda has returned back to normal after a tense election marked by violence in some parts of the country and the disputed poll results. President Yoweri Museveni has accused the main opposition party, led by Bobi Wine, of trying to destabilize the country and cause chaos.
I asked the confused people to come back to sanity, because what they are planning, what they wanted to do, we already know, and we have already demobilized.
Wine, also known as Robert Chagulanyi, is in hiding after security forces raided his home last Friday. How are you? How's your family?
I'm alive. I don't know how my family is.
He spoke to Al Jazeera.
I would love to be in my home. I've not changed my clothes in days. I want to be home. I want to be free. I want to take care of my people. But the military and police have taken over my home. This is a crackdown to intimidate, to silence, and to completely, subdue the forces of change.
You have rejected the elections. You said that the election is rigged. What evidence do you have?
This time, not the police, not the military, but Electoral Commission officials took part in pre-ticking ballot papers in favor of General Museveni. Glad enough, we have record of them. We have videos of them doing that.
Do you want people to come out to the streets to protest?
We want the people of Uganda to take charge of this and find numerous creative ways. Could be protesting on the streets. Some of us started protesting by holding high the national flag. Others can protest by staying at home.
Protests, largely over the election result, turned violent in different parts of the country. Most of the violence happened in areas like this. Several people were killed in some areas, allegedly by security forces. Police say they were containing a riot situation. Namutebi Oliver is grieving her son. He was shot by a stray bullet during running battles.
He died for no reason. It's unbelievable.
It's still unclear how many people died in this election, but what's clear is that many Ugandans remain fearful for their future. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera, Mukono Districts.
Don't miss out and get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insight.
Happening, making sure that there was no coverage over incidents of assault or violence or intimidation. There is that aspect of hiding that comes with the internet shutdown. So it's both, the perception that there is mistrust that comes into the process, but also a lack of coverage that comes in as a result.
Okay. Well, let me ask Obed then, tell us what, with this election win, what gains are being protected? I mean, are the institutions strong? Because we now have half the population of Uganda that's under 18 years of age, and so many of these people are first-time voters, and they really have no reference point for any other leadership. But what do they understand as the gains that are being protected?
Yes, the gains are simple and specific to Ugandans. Going by our history, you know very well that from independence, which took place in 1962, Uganda's history until when President Museveni came to power in 1986 was nothing but military coups, civil wars, anarchy, state collapse, the collapse of the economy. Uganda degenerated to levels of being a failed state. I think most of you guys know and knew that Uganda's population, half of it was literally living in exile. So when President Museveni comes to power, he sanitizes the politics by ending all forms of extrajudicial killings, ended the several civil wars that have mounted thereafter, resurrected the economy, put the country, lifted the country from a failed state to now a developing state that has given every Ugandan hope and proud to identify with and even be hopeful to get the best that any other person in democratic world enjoys. So bottom line, the gains are those that Uganda is no longer a failed state. Uganda is a peaceful country from one corner to corner. Uganda, like you know, is now a hub hosting refugees from across the world. In fact, it has the second biggest population of refugees who come to Uganda to seek safety. Uganda is participating in securing even stability of regional neighbors. It is now a model state. It is a peaceful country. It is a country that is on the road for transformation. And any Ugandan, fair of an adult mind, thinks that these gains that President Museveni has brought on board, irrespective of his age, should be maintained. And for as long as he still has energy, he has the brain, we should keep him and utilize him to move into another stage, which is probably moving into a fully industrialized nation.
Okay.
So the gains are many. I cannot go to elaborate them all.
But then, Obed,
socio-economic and whatever. But bottom line is,
I'm so sorry, there's a delay on the line. But let me ask you then, I mean, you say in spite of his age, because he's brought stability, this is why he should be welcomed as the continuing leader of Uganda. So why did he once say so firmly that the problem with Africa was leaders who just didn't want to leave, when now he is doing the same thing that he said was the fundamental problem across the continent?
But he has made clarification to that statement. In fact, he himself has said, to those who do not want to leave, but who would want to stay without the mandate of the people. The difference is you insist on preparation, you insist on leading when you don't have mandate. The reason there is periodic elections every 5 years is still to listen to the people and say, do still people feel I should lead them? And for as long as the people are comfortable with his leadership, by giving him an overwhelming vote like they did in these last elections, it gives him comfort to stay on until he lifts Uganda to a stage that he feels is satisfying for him to leave stage.
Okay, well then let me ask Raymond if that sounds logical. He modified the statement, but then speaking of the coups that Obed seems to feel Uganda has, the instability that Uganda has been able to avoid under the leadership of Yoweri Museveni, we're now seeing so many regimes across Africa, particularly in the coup belt, being overthrown for the same tenure, really, that we're now witnessing in Uganda. Many decades in power, saying they've legitimately won elections, but then you see the people are not happy. Would you think perhaps President Museveni is concerned with that, or is the dynamic in Uganda too different because his own son, for example, is head of the military?
So there are two contradictions that would arise with that. The first, the most important contradiction that's been played out in the election is that majority of Uganda's population are young people, and yet for some reason the person that's won the election is a leader that's been in power for more than 4 decades. That's the first contradiction. But the second contradiction that has also been played out a lot is, the election itself is being contested by an opposition candidate who has appeal amongst young people. He's been a singer. He's had massive crowds move around him. So those two contradictions have led, the narratives that we've seen. Uganda is definitely, in the Great Lakes region, considered one of the most stable nations. For more than 4 decades, there hasn't been a change of power through a coup, for example. Uganda has not had a civil war on its soil for now more than 20 years, which is unlike the DRC, which it shares its longest borderline. DRC has been at civil war for more than 4 decades. South Sudan, which it shares its second longest borderline, has also had a civil war and attempted coup d'etats. Tanzania had an election in which even leaders within the region felt was poorly handled. We saw William Ruto, the president of Kenya, say he felt that the election and the outcome of the election were poorly handled. So in that regard, Uganda is slightly different from the others. But there is mass anxiety. For many people heading into this election, the question really came up many times, which is, what's the plan for transition? What's the plan for the next leader? And that's something that the ruling party hasn't yet answered or responded. Many people are genuinely excited and see themselves represented by the opposition leader, but they don't see the solution coming from the opposition. And when you move, just like I told you, when you move into the rural areas, Uganda, of course, majority of the population lives in the rural areas. When you move into the rural areas, the election comes down to really one thing, which is, shall we have continuity or shall we go back to periods of instability, which existed before the NRM? And every time the narrative is constructed around that as the election point, then it makes it easy for the ruling party to win the election, because the ruling party has control of the military institutions, the judicial institutions. And that's also because of the nature of the constitution we have in Uganda, that it gives the president such abeyance of power. So the president can pick the chief justice. The president is allowed to pick all the chiefs of security. So if, for example, the opposition leader had won the election, he would have all this power at his disposal. And many people, when they're making that decision, that comes up to play. They say, would someone in a position of absolute power, like the presidency, act with the same way that the president Yoweri Museveni has acted? So yes, it's very likely that Museveni is getting unpopular in urban areas, but it's very difficult also to convince many Ugandans. When you move around and talk to people in the rural-urban divide, when you talk to even slightly older Ugandans who are between their 40s into their 60s, it's very hard to find people who agree that, the change candidate or the candidate who represents the kind of Uganda that would guarantee stability would come from outside of the ruling party. Many people think that the candidate who will succeed Museveni will come from inside of the ruling party, and that's because of the fear that the institution which guarantees stability, the military, is still controlled largely by the president, and that's because
the military was the army that won the civil war and guaranteed the stability. So it's a very difficult. Uganda is unique in that way, that it's not Tanzania, it's not South Sudan, it's not the DRC. It's unique in that way. It's much like Rwanda, for example, where the Rwanda Patriotic Front, which won the war after the genocide, is still in power. So if you are comparing them, Uganda is much like that.
Yeah. Sarah, expand on that if you can. The relationship really that exists in being unique between the presidency and the military. As I mentioned, it is his son that is the chief of the military. But also something that might be considered unique about Uganda, unlike others, with long ruling leaders, is that the opposition never seemed to be kind of co-opted by the leaders, by the rulers in Kampala. Bobi Wine, especially in his case, seemed to run completely independently with no efforts made by the ruling party to kind of see if they could just take the opposition in and work with them from the inside in order to cut the opposition altogether.
No, it's a very good point. I mean, I think there is a degree of a need to have some semblance of competition in politics in a lot of African countries. There might be a very big, unequal ability to organize, ability to coordinate between, the ruling party and opposition. But it does serve an important function, having some degree of competition. Even for the ruling party, it's useful that there is this semblance of competition that is there. I think there is obviously this unique dynamic with a close relationship with the military in Uganda. It certainly is not the only reason why Uganda has experienced less violence and less political instability in recent decades. There has been a lot of progress made by the government to really bring stable governance. But it does brush up against, this issue of a government that is increasingly out of step in some ways to society, particularly to the urban areas where in a lot of African countries we see the opposition parties having strongholds in the urban areas. And a government that's increasingly not reflective of a young urban population who do want to see some degree of change in leadership. Change in leadership obviously always comes with a degree of uncertainty in terms of stability. But it is the tension that's brushing up against the stability that the ruling party is pushing.
Well, then let me ask Obed a final question. Is there any place at all for opposition in President Museveni's Uganda, or does any opposition existing only welcome, by their definition, some level of instability that wouldn't benefit the country? Therefore, opposition must be quashed.
No, that's not true. There is space for political opposition. And maybe, like you might be aware, and all the pundits, that the current government of President Museveni has members of the opposition who have agreed to work with them, to work with him. You must be aware that the Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs, Norbert Mao, is the President General of the Democratic Party. You must be aware that the Minister for Gender and Social Development is a wife to the President General of Uganda People's Congress. There is all efforts to nurture political opposition in Uganda to work together. The government of Uganda on an annual basis commits money, a lot of money, to all political parties, including those that are opposed to President Museveni. And this money is shared according to the number of members of parliament each opposing political party has in parliament. So there is a culture to allow and nurture political opposition for as long as it has no violent behavior and for as long as it does not nurture criminal and urban incitements like some are doing right now. But for as long as there is political opposition that espouses decent political behavior, decent ethos of multi-party democracy, there is no problem. To the contrary, President Museveni is seen as someone who negotiate, who recede ground and work with them. Like I've just told you, the person who is the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs is a President General of a Democratic Party, the oldest party in Uganda, and President Museveni is comfortable working with them.
Okay, Raymond, very quickly, do you believe there is space for real opposition in Uganda, or only space for opposition that is willing to more or less succumb to the will of the ruling party?
I think it's genuinely hard to see how the opposition mobilize in a structure like this one. Like I told you, the military in Uganda is an offshoot from the NRA, which is the army that won the civil war. Many of the state institutions are still very much held by civilian cadre, so it's very hard to see how an opposition mobilizes within. For many Ugandans, many places where the centers of power sit, a genuine transition can only lie within the ruling party, not outside of the ruling party. It's very difficult for a message from the outside, and particularly on civil and political rights, to make it to the mainstream ballot.
Okay.
In the rural areas, it's very difficult to convince people that civil and political rights are the most important issue in an election campaign. And yet, we've seen that the state breakdown on opposition has really been around civil and political rights.
Okay.
Detentions, the arrests, those are really matters of civil and political rights. And yet the election was determined on fairly economic grounds. Yeah.
Raymond Bunjuni, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.
Much of Uganda has returned back to normal after a tense election marked by violence in some parts of the country and a disputed poll results. President Yoweri Museveni has accused the main opposition party, led by Bobi Wine, of trying to destabilize the country and cause chaos.
I asked the confused people to come back to sanity, because what they are planning, what they wanted to do, we already know, and we have already mobilized.
Wine, also known as Robert Chagulanyi, is in hiding after security forces raided his home last Friday. How are you? How's your family?
I'm alive. I don't know how my family is.
He spoke to Al Jazeera.
I would love to be in my home. I've not changed my clothes in days. I want to be home. I want to be free. I want to take care of my people. But the military and police have taken over my home. This is a crackdown to intimidate, to silence, and to completely, subdue the forces of change.
You have rejected the elections. You said that the election is rigged. What evidence do you have?
This time, not the police, not the military, but Electoral Commission officials took part in pre-ticking ballot papers in favor of General Museveni. Glad enough, we have record of them, we have videos of them doing that.
Do you want people to come out to the streets to protest?
We want the people of Uganda to take charge of this and find numerous creative ways. Could be protesting on the streets. Some of us started protesting by holding high the national flag. Others can protest by staying at home.
Protests, largely over the election result, turned violent in different parts of the country. Most of the violence happened in areas like this. Several people were killed in some areas, allegedly by security forces. Police say they were containing a riot situation. Namutebi Oliver is grieving her son. He was shot by a stray bullet during running battles.
He died for no reason. It's unbelievable.
It's still unclear how many people died in this election, but what's clear is that many Ugandans remain fearful for their future. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera.